challenge the conventional wisdom. So I said, this idea that reducing carbon is going to be expensive, let's challenge that. Okay, so you have to start looking at the dynamics of global economic growth to do that. Right? So one of the things that you find out very, very quickly is that, as I've written here, except for Syria, Somalia, Egypt, the Ukraine, and other countries facing major national security challenges at the moment, all other nations are pursuing one major objective above all others: promoting economic growth and jobs, right? As measured by GDP. Every president, every prime minister, every treasurer, finance minister, every CEO, every CFO, right? This is what they're doing 24/7, right? And it's not simple growth, right? We live on a planet that requires exponential growth, right? Why? Because, as I wrote, more people wanting more. You add more people, you have to feed them, and all the existing people you have, they want more than they had before, and the combination of that drives, right, an exponential system. Okay? So when you hear growth of 3%, obviously by definition, that's exponential. Okay? So that's the biggest force on the planet. That's why it's easy to understand why we don't make progress on climate change. Because if that's the greatest force on the planet, and everyone believes taking action on climate change is going to be expensive, then in fact you're running orthogonal, your climate change response is running orthogonal to the biggest force on the planet, right? Not hard to understand why we're not going to make progress under those circumstances. Okay, so then I said, all right, where are the sort of official GDP numbers, right? I hadn't started to question GDP as a metric yet, but I said, let's look at the numbers, right? So thank God my former employer, the OECD, put out this number. $305 trillion is what they are projecting global GDP needs to reach by 2050, right? And today, I wrote 2014, we're about 60 trillion. In 2010, we were about 55 trillion. In 1970, we were 18 trillion. So from 1970, in the 40 years that followed, right, we had a tripling of global economic output in 40 years. Pretty good result, right? That's a pretty good result. By the way, that's the biggest growth in human history. Right? But in the next 40-year period, right, that rate of growth has to double. Right? And it's just simple arithmetic in terms of people, right, and their demands, right, and how the system functions. Okay, the 305 trillion. The single biggest driver of that number are 2.5 billion new middle-class consumers that will be created between now and 2050. Most of those will be in Asia, but they will come from other areas around the world as well, the bulk of them in Asia. Those 2.5 billion people and the way that they spend their disposable income and the number of children they have are going to drive what happens on this planet between now and 2050. Okay, so now you've got a target number.